Welcome back to Outside View Scandals. Today we're stepping back into the tumultuous and bloody court of Henry VIII to talk about one of history's most infamous falls from grace, the disgrace of Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell's story is one of meteoric rise and devastating downfall. A self-made man who climbed to the heights of power only to lose it all in the blink of an eye. It's a story filled with ambition, intrigue, betrayal, and, a healthy dose of scandal. To understand Cromwell's downfall, we first need to look at his rise. Born around 1485, Cromwell came from humbling beginnings. He was the son of a blacksmith, and let's just say his childhood wasn't exactly gilded with privilege. But Cromwell was sharp, resourceful, and ambitious. He left England as a young man, traveling across Europe and gaining experience as a soldier, merchant, and lawyer. By the time he returned to England, he was ready to climb the ladder of power. Cromwell's big break came when he entered the service of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry VIII's chief minister. Wolsey was a man of immense power and influence, but when he failed to secure Henry's annulment from Catherine of Aragon, his fall was swift and brutal. Unlike his master, Cromwell managed to weather the storm. In fact, he saw an opportunity. He positioned himself as a loyal servant to Henry VIII and quickly gained the king's trust. What followed was an extraordinary ascent. Cromwell became Henry's most trusted advisor, orchestrating some of the most significant changes in English history. He was the architect of the English Reformation, helping Henry break away from the Catholic Church and establish the Church of England. And this wasn't just a religious shift, it was a political and economic revolution. By dissolving the monasteries, Cromwell not only severed ties with Rome, but also filled the royal coffers with wealth seized from the church. And this made him indispensable to Henry, at least for a time. But Cromwell wasn't just a reformer, he was also a master of court politics. He was cunning, ruthless, and pragmatic. He knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of Henry's court, where allegiances shifted like the wind and enemies lurked around every corner. Cromwell's rise was so remarkable that it's easy to forget just how precarious his position always was. Because in Henry's court, power was a double-edged sword. And now, let's talk about the fall. Cromwell's downfall was as dramatic as his rise. In 1540, after years of serving Henry faithfully, he was arrested, imprisoned, and executed on charges of treason and heresy. But here's the kicker. The charges were almost certainly fabricated. So what happened? How did the man who had been Henry's right hand suddenly become his enemy? The seeds of Cromwell's disgrace were sown in his greatest success, the English Reformation. By dismantling the monasteries and challenging the Catholic Church, Cromwell made powerful enemies. The old nobility resented his rise, viewing him as a low-born upstart who had no business wielding such power. The conservatives at court despised his Protestant leanings and reforms. Even among Henry's allies, there were those who envied Cromwell's influence. But the immediate trigger for Cromwell's downfall was his role in Henry's disastrous marriage to Anne of Cleves. In an effort to secure a Protestant alliance in Europe, Cromwell arranged Henry's fourth marriage to Anne, a German noblewoman. When Anne arrived in England, Henry was less than impressed. Let's just say she didn't meet his lofty expectations. Henry reportedly called her a Flanders mare and was so repelled that he sought an annulment almost immediately. Cromwell's enemies seized on this opportunity. They painted the marriage as a colossal failure and pinned the blame squarely on Cromwell. The Duke of Norfolk, a staunch Catholic and one of Cromwell's fiercest rivals, led the charge against him. Norfolk and his allies accused Cromwell of overstepping his bounds and pursuing his own agenda at the expense of the king's wishes. And Henry, ever the fickle monarch, was all too willing to believe them. On June 10th in 1540, Cromwell was arrested during a meeting of the Privy Council. It was a shocking turn of events. One moment, he was the most powerful man in England. The next, he was dragged off to the Tower of London. The charges against him were vague and dubious, but in Henry's court that hardly mattered. The king's will was law, and Cromwell's fate was sealed. In July 1540, Cromwell was executed on Tower Hill. His final words were a plea for mercy and loyalty to the king. It was a grim and ignoble end for a man who had wielded such immense power. But here's the irony. Less than a month after Cromwell's execution, Henry began to regret his decision. He complained that he had been manipulated into condemning Cromwell and lamented the loss of such a capable servant. In typical Henry VIII fashion, he shifted to blame onto others, conveniently forgetting that the decision had ultimately been his own. So why does Cromwell's fall still captivate us today? Perhaps it's because his story is so human. It's a tale of ambition, power, and betrayal. It's a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change, especially in the cutthroat world of politics. Cromwell's life was marked by extraordinary achievement, but his downfall was a brutal reminder that even the most powerful are not invincible. And let's not forget the scandal. Cromwell's disgrace wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a spectacle. His enemies reveled in his downfall, while the public watched with a mix of fascination and horror. In a way, Cromwell's story is the ultimate Tudor soap opera, complete with scheming nobles, romantic drama, and a king who could change his mind as often as his wives. So thanks for joining me on Outside View Scandals again, where we uncover the stories that history tried to sweep under the rug. And remember, in the world of power and politics, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Until next time, and the next video is already right here in the end screen.